Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Shaman's Way. I am delighted that you have gathered here today. So hello to my constant listeners, and hello to my semi-constant listeners, and of course, as always, a very special hello to my brand new listeners. I want to talk about journeys for self-healing. When I want to refer to healing, it refers to the four breakdown or the four aspects of the human spirit, from my perspective anyway. We have the physical, the spiritual, the mental, and the emotional, the four selves, the four aspects of self. Now, for myself, for this particular discussion, I am still using the medicine wheel, or I am using the medicine wheel. In this regard, I have put in the north is spiritual, in the south is physical, in the east is mental, and in the west is emotional. That doesn't mean that that has to be where you put the four states of humankind on the medicine wheel or not. It just means that for the discussion and the purposes of our meeting today, that is where I have put the four aspects of humankind. I haven't necessarily attributed each of the aspects of humankind to one direction or another, because I think they are certainly changeable. And from my perspective, I don't believe, for me anyway, they don't work as a consistent within one particular section or sector of the medicine wheel. So we're going to begin by talking about the north and journeys for self-healing and the spiritual. I think we could probably dedicate this entire podcast just to journeys of self-healing on the north or in the spiritual. But I'm not going to do that because I wanted to cover some of the various aspects of what we're doing based on all four quadrants of the medicine wheel. There are a couple of podcasts that would go very well with this. The first one is called 11 Tips and Tricks to Journeying, and the other one is called Tips and Tricks to Journey Interpretation. If you haven't listened to those, it may help you to get a better idea of what I mean in some of the terms that I might use. It also may give you some better ideas of how to journey or how to interpret your journeys. When we go for self-healing work, one of the challenges that we face is facing ourselves. It's sometimes, and I'm not talking about masks, I've talked about masks lots of times and how it's challenging for us to remove the masks and see ourselves for who we truly are. That holds true and simply has an aspect or a weight within this particular conversation that we're having. However, what it means from this perspective, what I'm referring to is that from the north perspective, in the spiritual perspective, we are going to deal with the how do we see ourselves? And again, as I talked about, it can be challenging. And I'm not talking about masks. What I'm talking about is that at times we have to journey through our own challenges. We have to journey through our own trips and traps that we have set up in our psychological makeup. It can be a challenge to journey to our true self because not just because of masks, but because we have a certain way of looking at ourselves and a certain way of believing that we can do X, Y, Z, or believing we are X, Y, Z in behavior or modifications or thought patterns or whatever it is, whatever it may have you. what I'd like to do is give you some ideas as to how to bypass as best as you can your original programming. And even, from a yoga perspective, the term samskara meaning the lessons that your soul has written upon yourself, that you follow through or that follow you through various lives, and that in a particular life, it could be this life, you are working at undoing the belief patterns that are literally written on your soul, which then become literally written into gridges and roofs on the brain. So from the yoga perspective, it's called samskara. And if you ever wish to look that up, it does have a really nice fit with respect to shamanism and some of the ideas that we have, that beliefs, behaviors, patterns, ideologies, etc., do follow us from one life into another life. So, north, spiritual. The medicine wheel for me is a very integral part of understanding us. I've discussed this on lots of times, and I would like to ask you to create a medicine wheel for yourself and write it out in regards to drawing a circle. And if you really suck at drawing a circle, just take a bowl out of your cupboard and take your pencil crayon or your pencil or your pen and draw that super fancy circle. That will be certainly correct and not oblong and weird. And then you can even take a handy dandy ruler. If you don't trust yourself, measure the middle of the circle, put a point in there, and then mark the quadrant as north, south, east, west, or you can divide it however you like, or not even do this at all. The reason that I like to use a medicine wheel for the process is because I find that I learn better if I can also see, track, and trace what is going on for me within the medicine wheel. In the north, we have the land of the ancestors. We have for me, the First Nation or the First People, which is the Rock Nation. Of course, they're here before anything else, and the creation of the world as it is, the creation of the water and the sand and the soil and everything that it came from, all began initially as a particular rock. So the first people in this particular place that we all beautifully live are the rock people, the Stone Nation. So the Stone Nation, from that perspective, have many things to teach us. And in the north, when we are journeying for answers of our spiritual self, it is not uncommon for you to be able to take along with you stones. So from my perspective, what I would do is I have a set of stones that I use for divination here in the middle world. And if I'm looking for something very specific to find, then I will take those stones with me into the spirit world. And when I'm looking for a direction, or if I think my mind is trying to fool itself, then I will throw the stones, and the stones will lead me in another direction, or a direction I may not have led to. So the stones are one way of moving or utilizing the voice of the north. The other aspect of the voice of the north for me is the darkness, because in the northern hemisphere, in the north, the moon and the sun never cross the northern hemisphere. So therefore, it is always a place of darkness. It is always a place of the greatest stars. If you come from a tradition where you believe, or the overculture that you believe in believes that you descended from the stars, or that your soul is made outside of the earth, then to have a spiritual or self-healing journey, one of the things that you could do is you could journey into the north and find your way up into the upper worlds, or up and into the stars. However you journey into the upper world is yours. And if you've never journeyed into the upper world, in one of the learning modules I have guided meditations specifically to take you to the upper world. And I believe there is even one that talks about how to meet your teacher in the upper world. The reason that I bring this up in respect to self-healing and working in the north is that oftentimes our teachers are not specifically related to the neuropsychology of ourselves. In that regard, they have a better outside opinion. Now, I'm going to stop there and just make a disclaimer for a moment. My disclaimer is that the spirits and the spirit world operate independent of me and not dependent on me. I believe that what I encounter in the spirit world is separate from me and not a piece or part of me. Rather, in journeys, I believe, or dreams, I believe most of the time, when you encounter a being or an animal or structure within your dream, it is generally a reflection of the psyche and the self. Unless you have what are termed as big dreams or prophetic dreams, that would be a difference for you. The reason that I bring this up is because I want you to have faith in the messages that the spirits return to you. I want you to have faith that what you are hearing from your spiritual teachers is actually the truth, and or could be an aspect of the truth or one-sided aspect of the healing. Some of the questions that you can take to them range from anywhere. So if you were journeying in the north and you've separated the medicine wheel into the 4 parts of humankind, then I would try to specifically remain within the quadrant of the medicine wheel that I'm working with and the spirits that I'm working with. In this particular area of the north, you can go into the upper world and work with the teachers, as I had just, talked about. It can also mean that you go deep down into the earth, into the underbelly of soul, the underworld of self, the underworld period, and journey through some of the darkest aspects of shadow or some of the darker aspects of the spirit world that are hidden within the roots of yourself. If journeying to that, journeying to the darkness, journeying to the earth itself, journeying by throwing stones, those are all very key ways to try to get around what you've planted as the truth within yourself. So the self-healing would be, the spiritual self-healing is, I want to become better at this. What can I do? I want to find this. Where do I go? I want to encourage more compassion. How do I do that? Etc., etc. I don't know what your spiritual questions are, but I like to journey to the ancestors and to confer with my ancestors. And that isn't just my grandmothers and my grandmothers. That can be my 8 generations back grandparents or my 8 generations back ancestors that I came from. Now, if we are working specifically with the physical, if you have aches or pains or pieces of your body that don't work as well as other parts of your body, then I would journey in the south, into the sun, into the 4-leggeds. I would journey to that youthful self. On south of the medicine wheel, we are coming from, an early adolescence to, your mid-years, so your early 30s or your early 40s. And that is where we are south on the medicine wheel. In that place as well, in finding the physical healings, journey for physical healings, you can actually undertake to journey to the part of the body that has wounding. So if you have rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis, you may want to journey to the spirit of arthritis that lives in the bones. So instead of journeying out into another place, where you can start south on the medicine wheel is envision yourself in the middle of a medicine wheel or on a plateau or in a meadow or wherever you think you're going to be. And one of the ways that I teach to journey into the body is to enter through the top of the head. However, that doesn't work so once you journey into the top of the head, then what I ask people to visualize is that their body is like an open tube. And as you walk through your body, you're able to look down into the muscle structure. You're able to look up into how the blood is working. You are able to journey through into the heart and find out what's going on with the heart or find out what's going on into the muscles. They're very potent ways of finding healing for yourself by journeying to the particular body part. One of the other journeys that you can do to bring health back is if you've suffered an injury or if you've suffered an illness, to journey back in time to just prior to the accident, just prior to the onset of illness, to meet the soul piece of yourself, or the soul of yourself that doesn't know the injury, and to see if you can retrieve that part of yourself that was left behind and in its place moved in unhealth. Now, from this perspective, the reason that I say this is because there are times when the pieces of our body have lost bits of its own essence, its own sense of self, its own sense of soul, that ensouling of self, that embodiment, truly in the truest form of embodiment. The physical body has the ability to tell you lessons and to tell you messages, to tell you what you may or may not need. Now, when I say this, at times it can be more challenging to deal with the physical than the spiritual, because you already have a preconceived notion of when it began, or you have a preconceived notion of what started the illness, what started the effect. So sometimes in a situation like this, we may ask for somebody else to journey on our behalf. And that may not necessarily be possible for you simply because you do not have anyone in your life, in your community, or in your sphere who has the ability to do shamanic journey work, let alone even believes that there is such a thing as shamanic journey work. So I do offer this as an option. If you have someone in your life that you can work with, it may help in that regard. Oftentimes, if there's a piece of the essence of a part of the body, it is, from my perspective, is blown into the body, very similar to when you have soul retrieval done and it is blown into the body. So from the physical perspective as well, you can receive spontaneous healing. There are times when I have journeyed into the spirit world without the intention of healing XYZ, or even looking at the proponent of XYZ, only to find out that indeed I have run into a spirit who is willing to trade me, or is willing just to heal me from whatever it is I'm dealing with, specifically on that, with respect to the physical body. Another aspect of the physical body for myself, now this may not necessarily work for you, but it does work for me, is that I am able to quite easily obtain x-rays, or I've even had an MRI, and I think I've talked about this before, but I had a very severe shoulder injury, just as one instance. And the bursa sac was so swollen and so sore that I had extremely limited range of motion within my shoulder. I never went to journey to find out how to heal that shoulder, but what occurred during the journey was an unexpected occurrence with a spirit who was teaching me how to use a sword, and I let my guard down and I received a very sharp blow and severe cut to my shoulder, which had been sore in the physical world. When I came out of my journey, that very same journey, I was actually able to lift my arm up over my head, and certainly hadn't been able to do that for quite some time, for probably a few months by that point in time. So that too is an aspect of it, that physical healing, spiritual healing, emotional healing. It can all really occur when you are least expecting it, or not expecting it at all. The East is the mental, and the reason I put it in the East in the medicine wheel is because East is, for me, it is for illumination, it is for awakening, it is for the quickening of the mind, it is air. So for me, air generally means intellect or mind. There are many challenges with the mind. There are behavior patterns, there are thought patterns, there are quieting the voices in your head, there are obsessive compulsive behaviors that you may wish to at least make peace with if you can't rid yourself of them. There are many aspects. Now, I may challenge your belief structure here, but from my perspective, in the East, because I work with very many winged, or work with winged spirits, I would initially go to my winged spirits and I would ask them to help me fly above my mental situation and help me track or trace what is going on. Where is the root of my mental block? I have certain belief structures built into me from respect to my education and my childhood, which say you can't do X, Y, you don't understand X, Y, I'll never get organic chem. Well, let's face it, I'll probably never understand organic chem. But I believe that I could definitely move into my brain or have a conversation with my brain, not necessarily to help me understand organic chem, although that would have been great all those years ago when I was in university, but that's a whole other story. In moving into my brain, or the process of my learning, or the process of learning how I'm going to feel about myself, perhaps I can change something. Same as we do, when we work with our shadow, or we do past life work, or we do curse work, we go into the body very specifically to attempt to alter or change a behavior pattern or thought pattern. In using the winged beings, I do fly above my own self and seek to find what is going on, what has moved within me, those sorts of things. Another aspect of the mental is that also combines with the physical is oftentimes stress or anxiety come out in the form of headaches or racing thoughts. So I would journey to, for me, because this, and this may challenge some of your shamanic beliefs because this is not shamanic, but this is more from the Buddhist perspective. I would journey to the Buddha or to the Bodhisattvas. More than likely, I would journey to the Bodhisattva than to the Buddha. And the reason I would journey to a Bodhisattva is because a Bodhisattva is one who could move through enlightenment, but is here in this world because they are such compassionate beings that they wish to heal, to share, to move with the beings of this world. So I like to work with the Bodhisattvas because I find their compassionate energy is very helpful for me mentally. I find that the level of compassion that they demonstrate is a good teaching tool for me. And in the mental, remember, we also have mindfulness. That also corresponds with spiritualness, but mindfulness comes from that place of quieting the mind, quieting the body, quieting the spirit. And in the East, one of the practices in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in yoga practices is staying with the breath. Always be with the breath. You cannot be in the past, you cannot be in the present if you're focused specifically on how you breathe in that particular moment. It's true. So for me, working in the East is also a gentle reminder of working with mindfulness, working with my yoga, working with my ability to remain intellectually active. So by reading, by encouraging my mind to learn, by encouraging my mind to step outside its limitations, to step outside of my own archaic thinking, to step outside the box. And that all leads to healing of self. If I'm healing my mental self, then my mental self, which has control over many other aspects of myself, as all four aspects of humankind will interact and correspond to one another. If we are picking a particular aspect of ourself that we wish to work on, it will work in consort and also have effects on other parts of the medicine wheel. For the wheel is connected and you cannot separate one from the other, for that circle is continuous and ever binding and ever working, same as if we work from a spiral perspective. There's always the beginning and always the end, and they interchange depending on whether you're moving in or whether you're moving out. So working with the East, working with the Eastern philosophy, working with the winged beings, tracking and tracing a thought form, tracking and tracing the saboteur, tracking and tracing the sorcerer. What is it that trips me up? So in the South, I would also put the sorcerer and the saboteur. And how can I find them? How can I get to the truth of my own mental meanderings? I know I've talked about this before. I know I've shared it with students over the past. However, I strongly encourage you, if you can, to create for yourself or find for yourself a truth serum. That may sound a little hokey pokey, but hey, you're listening to a podcast on shamanism. So suck it up and remember that sometimes what we do is considered by the outside world a little hokey pokey. It's because they're not informed. They're not as awesome as us. We're not judging. We're just acknowledging. Okay, I got a little judgy, but she was having fun with it. Anywho, from the emotional perspective, when we are again journeying to the 4 aspects of humankind, I will put that in the West. And the reason that I put it in the West is the West for me is associated with water, which is associated with emotions. It's also associated with the deep waters of the psyche, of the soul. There are the magical beings, the creatures, the water beings. They, for me, are West on the medicine wheel. The unconscious self in my spirit world is often shows up in 2 very separate ways. It can show up as moving deeper and deeper and deeper into the earth. So going down into one catacomb, into another cave, into a deeper catacomb, to a cave beneath that. So I continually get into the deeper aspects of psyche. However, there's also that part of the water where we move deeper and deeper into the water, into that which is the emotional self, the emotional soul, to find self-healing. We can be very hard on ourselves emotionally. We often don't know how to close emotions. It's very important to close emotions, to close the emotional loop. So if we have behavior patterns, if we have thought patterns, if we have emotional triggers, we can often journey to where that loop ends, where that loop comes. And that's a deep part of psychology, or an aspect of psychology, is to find that part of yourself that can be closed off. Otherwise, that repetitive emotion or the repetitive patterns don't stop for us. They continue to come for us. Encouraging the emotional self to have expression. Obviously, I associate the saltwater tears with the saltwater of the ocean. I also associate the saltwater as the salt carrying the electronic impulses, or the impulses of the nerves that feed and talk and work with the body itself. And that I find to also be very beneficial, to see that, to know that, to work with that. The emotional side of the body, also when we work in the West, there are sometimes very compassionate beings that reside within the waters. Many people work with dolphins. Many people work with whales in the spirit world. Many people work with turtles. So there are very potent medicine keepers in the water. The killer whale, the whales in and of themselves are often considered to be one of the oldest wisdom keepers, one of the oldest beings that store the memories of the earth. And we often find more compassion for our emotional self when we are dealing with beings who are immersed and representative to our psyche with respect to emotions and how emotions work or don't work, or how they interplay or don't interplay. We are seeking spirits that have compassion, good compassion for us. We are more likely to become engaged with the messages and the healing techniques that they may perhaps be willing to share with us, simply because they offer a place of compassion, or they stand in a place of compassion at the outset. And by standing in the place of compassion at the outset, we're more likely to receive the message, even if that message may be challenging or difficult to hear. If we're also dealing with the emotional healing, one of the aspects in the West is the ability to sever emotional relationships, to sever the connections or the cords between us and between others. One of the ways to do that is with Hawaiian Shamanism, the Ho'oponopono, and which means to give, I think, or I can't remember right off the top of my head. But I know that, to make right. That's what it is. Ho'oponopono means to make right, right. To make everything right. And from that emotional, so then we can sever or cut or disengage ourselves from the cords that connect us from one person to another person. I also find that allowing myself to swim into the waters will cleanse my body of things that are attached or taken to me, or I surrender myself to the healing beings of each of the directions, because there are healing beings in the north, south, east, and west. And if you have never journeyed to your healing beings, and it's different from your own inner shaman, the archetype of the inner healer, if you indeed have that archetype, not everybody does. And by figuring out who those healing spirits are that are associated with the different directions also gives you a better idea how to work with the physical, the spiritual, the mental, and the emotional aspects of self. If you have never journeyed to the healing beings or the healing partners for each of the directions, I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to attempt to make relationship with the spirits who are actively engaged, not only in helping you, but could be actively engaged in healing you. If they're not actively engaged in helping or healing you, then they could be actively engaged in awakening your tracker, in awakening your ability to track things for yourself. The journey to the north, you could start off with a medicine wheel, or you could put a world tree or a world mountain, whatever you like, in the center of your wheel, or it doesn't even have to be the wheel, but just in the center of self, and journey from that perspective. So for me, if I'm looking for something of value or of interest and I need to figure out where I need to go, I will walk around the tree that is in my spirit world, my world tree, my axis mundi, and by walking around with my hand on the bark, I can tell which direction I'll need to move in simply by my relationship with the tree, simply by my relationship with the bark, simply by understanding that subtle language between the tree and myself. Sometimes it's not so subtle. Sometimes our spirits are not subtle. And from there, journeying to, so if you are walking around your tree, if this is indeed one of the actions you do, and if you get to the south, and the south says, yes, this is the direction that I want you to go. The tree says this is the direction that you will get your most learning from. So off you go, trotting into the south. If you have already engaged with a healing spirit there, then by engaging with the healing spirit in the south, you can track what is that physical ailment, what is that physical trajection, why am I so fatigued, and what can I do to lessen the effects of my chronic illness? What can I do to lessen the effects of the arthritis growing in my feet, or the cancer growing in my body, or the multiple sclerosis, or any number of things that are going on or for you, but regardless of how people see them, whether other people would see your physical ailment as being minuscule or could see your physical ailment as being almost insurmountable. There is a spectrum of everything. There is a spectrum of physical healing, emotional healing, mental healing, spiritual healing. There is an entire spectrum. There are many journeys that you can do, and you can figure out for yourself, where can I go? How can I do it? One of the things that will help you on your way is to more fully understand what it is, the four conditions of humankind, and what those demarcations are for the four conditions of humankind. And if you don't want to work with the spiritual in the north and the physical in the south and the mental in the east and the emotional in the west, because you have placed the elements on your medicine wheel in different places, then you really need to work with whatever wheel you're working with. If you don't work with a medicine wheel, then I strongly encourage you to find some way to track and to trace what's going on for you. That's because I am a visual learner, and I'm a kinesthetic learner. So for me, I have to go through things in order to learn them. If I want to understand how I'm feeling, if I write it out and I get my body to write it out, it is more likely I'm going to remember it. If you introduce yourself to me, I'm less likely to remember your name if I don't write it down, because I'm not an auditory learner. I am a kinesthetic and I'm a visual learner. So I'll see what you're doing, and then I need to go do it by myself. and figure out how to do it. Because that's how my brain works, especially after my stroke. My brain started to work in this manner as opposed to the way that it had before. We are not at a loss for any way to find how to work with ourselves, how to work with our spirits, how to work with what we're going through. We are not at a loss. The only thing we are that limits us is our imagination. The other thing that limits us, not only our imagination, but the use of our imagination, the ability to trust our imagination, the ability to work outside of the constraints of what society and or other humans believe you must work within. We are significant beings, even unto ourselves we are significant. And if the world wishes you to feel insignificant, then I strongly, strongly encourage you to journey for healing that part of yourself and journey for healing those lies about yourself. If you are been told not to take up enough space, or you feel like you can't take up space, figure out where that lie came from. Where did that limiting belief structure, who put it in your head? What put it in your head? Did you come with it? Was it was it an emotional relationship? Was it when we talked about in respect to relationship with self, in relationship to that healing aspect, where do we go from here? So I know I'm babbling at this point. So I will end this particular podcast, but I wish to strongly encourage you never to give up on yourself. I strongly encourage you to never give up exploring. And I even more strongly encourage you to recognize your value and your worth. Your value and your worth are never taken away from you. You lose sight of it. But no one can take your value or your worth away from you. You were born with it. It is your sovereign right. It is your right, period. So if that is something that you struggle with, I strongly encourage you to look beyond what lies you've been told and to how to ferret out the beginning of those untruths spoken to your gentle soul and lived and manifested in your gentle soul. I encourage you to believe in yourself. Above all, believe in yourself, because if nobody believes in you and you don't believe in yourself, nothing will ever get done. But believing in ourselves can be incredibly challenged when the world seems to be set up. Although it offers many platitudes about believing in yourself, I don't really think that the world is designed specifically for those of us who don't fit within whatever the status quo happens to be. And I believe that we are gentle and astounding creatures, and because we are gentle and astounding creatures, sometimes we require a gentle hand with ourselves. We require us to heal ourselves gently, to see ourselves gently, and to see ourselves loved in ways that perhaps we didn't believe were possible. I leave you here. I have certainly gone off on a tangent and kept you longer than normal. Thank you for your kind attention, and head on over to shamansway.net if you haven't already and look at what we have to offer. In the meantime, and in between time, I want you to focus on you, focus on the amazingness of you, and meet me back here the next time that you can, and let's share some more thoughts, some more insights, and some more ideas on how to learn together, how to grow together, and how to learn by yourself and how to grow by yourself, and how not to be ashamed of the beautiful, awesome person that you are. Until next time, many blessings.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.